Hello, Mr. McCarthy here with a follow-up video. And this is something that I've put together for my class at Florida State University on formative and interim assessments and how they can improve instruction. So this will be geared to 3rd through 5th grade, specifically 3rd grade, which is where I've worked in the past. And I will talk about some of the assessments that we're using at Avant-Garde Academy and Broward County Schools. So thanks for paying attention to this. I hope it is productive for you. So, formative assessments. Formative assessments are given by teachers, and the explicit purpose is to diagnose where students are in their learning, where gaps in knowledge exist, and to help improve student learning. So that is something that takes place in real time, and it's a way to get a temperature check either of an entire group or specific individuals and specific students to see what isn't being retained, what isn't being comprehended, so that you can immediately step in and put some fixes in. Interim assessments are used to predict a student's ability to succeed in upcoming summative assessments and also to diagnose gaps in student learning. So the key difference here is that formative assessments are used by the teacher in the classroom to guide immediate instruction and perhaps reteaching. Interim assessments may be used for data analysis to help understand what's going on at the school level or even at the district level. So that's a key difference that I saw in the readings here. And then we know summative assessments. Summative assessments are given at the end of the year, either in school for an end of year test or the big bad high stakes testing currently in Florida, the Florida Standards Assessment, which is changing, and I'll get into that in a little bit as well. I was so almost relieved to read this direct quote from a scholarly article that we're reading. And I'm just going to read it to you. We understand that there is no current consensus on the definition of formative assessment, although leaders in our field have been working on a definition for some time now. Even less time and effort have been spent defining interim assessments. That's why I say that there's some ambiguity and some overlap between what an interim assessment is and what a formative assessment is. And the definitions that I went over already are from this same article. So I think that one of the key differences is that the interim assessments will be used for data scrutiny and big objective planning for grade levels, schools, and even districts. The reason I say I was comforted to hear that is just because there's a bit of personal confusion. And I think just generally, we hear all these terms and we're not quite sure what the difference is, how they're similar, how they're different. And knowing that it's not just me that has this kind of ambiguity around it is comforting. And so there's a reason to dive deeper, understand the differences, and more importantly, understanding the similarities and why they're used, how they're effective, and how we can use all of them. So, improving assessment. This was in an article that dealt specifically with formative assessments, but I believe that these key points here are true of interim assessments as well. So, assessments can help us understand the emotional dynamics. And we need to understand the social emotional components of assessing. And we don't want to dishearten students right at the beginning. We want to make sure that the assessments are being used in a positive manner. We want to assure effective assessment. We want to use assessment for pupil learning. That is the big takeaway. The assessments are to understand what's being taught, if it's being taught effectively, where the gaps are for whole classes, because then that would necessitate a reteach or for specific individuals that are going to need some intervention. Effective teacher preparation, informative applications, providing leadership for formative assessment. And here's another big one, educating communities, school boards, and legislatures. We need to be able to have conversations with the community about assessing, about why we assess, about how we assess, about what we do with the data. So these are all ways that assessments improve education for us and improve student learning. So again, in regards to formative assessment, here are some keys to quality assessments. We need to have a clear purpose for the assessment, clear targets. We have to make sure that the assessments are accurate, and there needs to be effective communication. That is a big component of it. The students need to understand clear purpose and effective communication kind of go hand in hand. They need to understand why we're taking the assessment, what the purpose of it is, and afterward, there needs to be effective communication and feedback as to what went well for the student, what needs to be improved, and that should be collaborative conversation so that the teacher understands what the student is lacking, why maybe they're not getting the lesson, and the student also needs to understand where the gap is. So it's got to be a two-way communication between student and teacher. And again, we need to keep in mind that the teacher needs to be communicating with the parents so that they understand the assessments and the gaps. Interim assessment purposes. There's instructional, predictive, and evaluative. So the instructional component, how are students doing and how can teachers improve student performance? That is a big part of this. We need to understand where the gaps are and what the teacher can do between the beginning and the end of the year. Predictive, how likely are specific students to do, how are they going to score on the end of the year test? So this interim data helps us understand where they're going to be landing at the end of the year. And then the evaluative component is going to help the teacher understand what is working in the classroom and what is not, where there needs to be improvements, and how we can get the instructional lessons to be more precise to lead to retention and comprehension. And there are numerous interims assessments that we'll discuss in a moment also. So teaching and learning cycles, this was kind of a cool concept to me. Learning is cyclical. The way that we assess, teach, reteach is all cyclical. So we need to, again, clearly establish learning goals, provide learning opportunities through instruction. That's when we assess academic gains. We use the data collected to begin again, to establish new learning goals. And it's cyclical. This is a nonstop loop. So assessing is part of the process, and the process continues after the assessment data is collected. I thought that that was an interesting concept to keep in mind. So currently, assessments being used at AGA and in Broward County are formative assessments at AGA or mid-chapter checkpoints, iReady teacher assigned lessons, and exit tickets. So those have similar functionality, but different modalities of implementing, and either for a daily lesson or at the end, at the middle of a unit, to really see and understand where students are and what needs to be done to get them ready for a larger assessment. And iReady teacher assigned lessons are amazing. I love iReady. This is a way for teachers to really pinpoint specific needs for specific students. Interim assessments, benchmark assessment system, running records, the BAS. So the BAS is interesting because it's a diagnostic, but it's also an interim. The same thing with the oral reading records. Those are diagnostic in the beginning, but then they're reused and they're used throughout the year to assess growth and to offer kind of a prediction of where the student will be. And then, of course, the iReady diagnostic for periods 1 and 2. Period 3 is a summative end of year test in many schools, including ours. But all of these are interim assessments. And the thing to be aware about interim assessments or progress monitoring is that as we get the best standards rolled out fully next year, there's going to be a FAST assessment. It's going to be replacing the Florida statewide assessment. And the FAST is going to be progress monitoring instead of that big high stakes test at the end of the year. We are not quite sure what it's going to look like yet, and more will be revealed. But based on how teachers utilize interim right now, I think that this progress monitoring will be really beneficial for students and teachers. So it does say on the website for the Florida Department of Education that these new assessments will make it so that the tests aren't so burdensome on the students. So there won't be, 4 days of testing for third graders at the end of the year. But I think that having 3 different progress monitoring assessments through the course of the year is going to kind of shift the way that teachers are using time and students are using time. I think that there's going to be a big focus on training teachers so that they understand how to implement these assessments. So especially in the first couple of years, I think that teachers are going to have to reacclimate to the way that we're facilitating these growth checks, because they're going to be not high stakes tests, but of paramount importance, that teachers understand how to facilitate them and that the data taken is valid. So that's going to be a big part of the next couple of years. And then obviously teachers should understand what's going on each year after year and, take, how do I say this? Take coaching, take, self-reflection moments to see what's working, what isn't, and how each individual needs to grow into this new opportunity. I think families and teachers and students are going to be pleased by it, but it's going to take some time to reacclimate. Here are the references for this piece today, and I look forward to hearing any feedback. Please feel free to email or write with any questions, and I appreciate your time.